All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So today we're tackling something I think we've all experienced at some point. Those frustrating arguments with our partners.
Oh, yeah. The ones that seem to play on repeat.
Exactly. And you end up feeling even worse than before you started.
I know there's well.
Well, we're going to explore how to find some peace, maybe even some intimacy and validation in those high conflict moments.
Sounds good to me.
Our guide for this deep dive is The High Conflict Couple by Dr. Alan E. Fruzzetti.
Oh, he's fantastic. A leading expert in DBT.
Dialectical Behavior Therapy.
Yes.
So his approach is really interesting. What would you say? He doesn't just focus on like the surface level disagreement, right?
Right. He really dives into the root of it all.
And that is?
What he calls dysregulated emotions.
Okay. So not just regular old upset, right?
Yeah.
What do you mean by dysregulated?
It's about those times when emotions completely take over. And they kind of hijack your ability to think clearly or act in a way that actually helps the situation.
It's like your emotions are in the driver's seat and logic is just stuck in the back.
I like that. That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's not so much about the specific fight itself.
It's more about how you're showing up to the fight.
Exactly. In fact, he compares it to dancing.
Okay.
When your emotions are dysregulated, it's like you're both losing your balance in the dance. You know, stepping on each other's toes.
Ouch.
And making that next step even harder.
Yeah. I've been in those dances for sure.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like one person is doing the tango and the other one's trying to waltz.
Totally.
And he talks about that difference in emotional sensitivity.
He does, yeah. And that can be a huge source of misunderstanding. Because some of us are just wired to react much more intensely to certain situations, while others might seem, totally unfazed.
Yeah. Like when you're getting worked up about something and your partner seems completely oblivious, you're like, hello, do you not see my pain?
Yeah, it can feel like they're not taking your feelings seriously.
Exactly. And that's often at the core of these conflicts, right?
Absolutely.
That feeling like your emotions aren't being understood or validated.
Mm-hmm.
But before we even get to communication strategies, he makes a really interesting point about acceptance.
Yes.
So how do we bring that into a relationship that feels like a constant battleground?
Well, he says it starts with ourselves, and it starts with mindfulness. Being aware of our own emotions, being able to notice our partner's emotional state as well.
Yeah.
But he also gives a tangible practice that I really like.
Okay, tell me.
It's called a relationship spot.
What is that?
So you designate a place in your home.
Uh-huh.
Could be a comfy chair, a corner of the bedroom, whatever feels good.
Okay.
Where you go daily to intentionally reflect on the good things about your partner and the good things about your bond.
Okay. So you're basically shifting your focus from the conflicts to the connection.
Yeah, it might sound a little too simple, but think about it. You're essentially retraining your brain to focus on the positive aspects of the relationship.
Yeah. Almost like building a mental muscle for appreciation.
Yes, exactly. And that can really help you stay grounded in those really heated moments. It's harder to completely fly off the handle when you've recently taken the time to appreciate your partner.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, I'm already thinking about where my relationship spot is going to be. But there's another layer to this acceptance thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about focusing on the good stuff. It's also about our own kind of messy bits.
Absolutely. Self-acceptance is crucial. Before we can have those tough conversations with our partner, we have to be able to accept our own emotions and vulnerabilities.
So no pointing fingers until we've looked in the mirror.
Right.
Acknowledging our own stuff.
Sets a much healthier foundation for communication.
I like that.
And now, once we have that sense of acceptance, both for ourselves and for our partners, Dr. Fruzzetti guides us towards mastering the art of communication.
Okay.
And he starts by making a really important distinction between primary and secondary emotions.
All right, break that down for me. Primary versus secondary. What's the difference?
So think about it this way. Let's say your partner works late and you're feeling lonely. Okay, that loneliness is your primary emotion, that root feeling.
Okay.
But if you start judging your partner, like they should care more, that anger, that becomes your secondary emotion. And often it's those secondary emotions that fuel the arguments.
Ah, so the secondary emotion is like a reaction to the primary emotion.
Yeah.
And that's where things can go off the rails.
Precisely, yeah. So to help us communicate more effectively, he gives us this tip that's so simple yet brilliant. Before you launch into a difficult conversation, take what he calls a bathroom break.
Wait, a bathroom break?
Seriously. I know, right? But think about it. It's a strategic pause.
Okay.
A chance to get out of that heat of the moment, use that time to calm down, Maybe check your facial expression in the mirror. And most importantly, remind yourself what your genuine goals are for the relationship.
Wow. I've never thought about a bathroom break as a communication tool, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
It's like hitting the reset button before things escalate.
Because when emotions are running high, we tend to express things in ways that aren't actually accurate, and that just fuels the conflict further. So taking a moment to get centered can make a huge difference.
Okay. So we've got acceptance, mindful communication. What else does he have in store for us?
Well, he spends a lot of time talking about the power of validation,
Okay.
which is absolutely essential for any relationship,
Mm.
but especially those that are prone to high conflict.
Okay, so validation. What's that look like in practice?
It's about truly understanding and acknowledging your partner's experience, even if you don't agree with it.
Okay.
It's about communicating that their feelings and their perspectives are valid, even if you see things differently.
So it's not about agreeing, but about really seeing the other person and letting them know you see them.
You got it. And to really hammer home this point, he introduces something he calls the validation rule of 3.
Okay. The rule of 3. Tell me more.
He suggests validating your partner 3 times consecutively.
Even when you're on the receiving end of invalidation.
Even when they are invalidating you.
Yes. That's the key to breaking that cycle of negativity. By consistently validating, even when it feels really difficult, you create space for a more productive dialogue.
Wow. That takes some serious emotional fortitude.
Hmm.
But it sounds like it could be a real game changer. Does he give any examples of how this actually plays out? He does, yeah. There's a story about a couple, Paul and Veronica, who are stuck in their usual pattern of blame and criticism.
Uh-huh.
But this time, Paul had learned about the rule of 3, and he decides to put it into practice.
Okay, what happened?
So instead of firing back, Paul takes a deep breath, and he validates Veronica's feelings. He acknowledges her pain and how difficult the argument is for both of them.
Okay.
And he does this 3 times in a row, even though she's continuing to be critical.
Wow. So what was her reaction?
At first, she kept going with the criticism, but with each validation, her defenses seemed to weaken a little bit. Eventually, her anger kind of gives way to sadness. Wow.
And she opens up to Paul about what's really going on beneath the surface.
So by just staying grounded and validating her experience, he was able to shift the dynamic.
Exactly. It transforms a moment of conflict into a moment of connection. And that's the power of validation. It can break through those deeply ingrained patterns and allow for genuine understanding.
Okay, so you've got these 3 key tools.
Yeah.
Acceptance, mindful communication, and this powerful validation rule of 3. I'm starting to see how those can really work together to create a more peaceful dynamic,
Yeah.
even in these high conflict relationships. But what happens when we need to move beyond just managing emotions
Right.
and actually start tackling the issues?
Well, that's where Dr. Fruzzetti's advice on problem solving comes in.
Okay.
And that's what we'll explore next time.
So we've been talking about laying the groundwork for healthier communication, right?
Right.
Being mindful of our emotions, accepting ourselves and our partners, and really learning to validate each other's experiences. But what about those actual issues?
That keep causing the conflicts. How do we move from just managing emotions to actually, like, solving problems?
Well, that's where he introduces some really practical techniques for problem solving.
Okay.
He emphasizes that it's not about avoiding arguments altogether,
Right.
but about learning to manage those disagreements more effectively as a team.
Okay. So shifting from a me versus you mentality
Yeah.
to a we're in this together approach.
Exactly. He introduces this technique called chain analysis,
Okay.
which helps you to break down those recurring arguments step by step.
Okay.
It's like detective work, you know?
Yeah.
You're trying to identify the specific triggers that set off that chain reaction of negativity.
Instead of just reacting in the moment, we're taking a step back to understand those patterns.
Right. And once you understand those patterns, you can start to identify alternative ways of responding. Maybe there's a certain phrase that your partner uses that always triggers you.
Right.
Or maybe there's a particular time of day when arguments are more likely to happen. By becoming aware of those triggers, you can start to create a more conscious plan.
So it's like you're creating a roadmap for those high conflict zones. So
Yeah.
you're not just blindly reacting each time.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that not every problem has an immediate solution. Sometimes acceptance and tolerance are just as important as problem solving.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are some issues that you just might not be able to resolve completely,
Right.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more about finding ways to manage the issue. And coexist peacefully, even if you don't see eye to eye.
Absolutely. And that can be a real challenge for couples who are used to approaching conflict with that win-lose mentality.
Right.
But when you can shift to a mindset of acceptance and tolerance, it takes a lot of pressure off the relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting because so far we've been focusing a lot on managing conflict. But Dr. Fruzzetti also talks about the importance of actively cultivating joy and connection,
Yes.
even in these relationships that struggle with conflict.
Yeah. It's so important to remember that even amidst those challenging moments, there's still room for love and laughter and those moments of shared joy.
Yeah. So how do we bring more of that good stuff into the relationship, especially when it feels like conflict has taken center stage?
Well, he encourages couples to engage in what he calls relationship activating activities,
Okay.
things that foster connection and strengthen the bond.
So we're talking date nights, shared hobbies, that kind of thing.
That's part of it,
Yeah.
but it goes beyond just spending time together. He emphasizes the importance of sharing ideas and interests, engaging in recreational activities together, expressing affection in meaningful ways. And I think one of the most important points he makes is about actively noticing and appreciating your partner.
So not just being physically present, but really tuning in and being emotionally present.
Yes. It's about cultivating a mindful awareness of your partner's presence, their actions, their efforts. It's about catching them doing something good and acknowledging it, even if it's something small.
It's so easy to fall into patterns of taking each other for granted,
Yeah.
especially when conflict has become kind of the dominant theme.
Absolutely. And when we take each other for granted, we miss out on those opportunities for connection and appreciation. He reminds us that the more interest and attention we show towards our partner, the more present and attentive they will be in return.
Yeah, it's like a positive feedback loop.
Exactly.
It makes me think of that quote, what you focus on expands. Like if we're constantly focused on the negative aspects of the relationship, that's what we're going to see more of. But if we can shift our focus to the positive, even in small ways, it can have a ripple effect.
Exactly, and that's why these relationship activating activities are so important. They help us to break out of those negative patterns and create more positive experiences to focus on. Even small gestures of appreciation and consideration can make a big difference.
You know, we've talked a lot about specific techniques, the bathroom break, chain analysis, the validation rule of 3. But it seems like there's an overarching theme here that's just as important.
What's that?
Communication. It feels like clear, accurate communication is really the foundation for everything we've talked about, whether it's expressing our needs, validating our partner's experience, or working together to solve problems.
You're absolutely right. Communication is like the lifeblood of any relationship, and he dedicates a big portion of the book to mastering that skill.
Yeah, he gives us that bathroom break strategy, which I love. Are there any other communication gems that he offers?
One of the key points he emphasizes is the importance of communicating our genuine feelings, wants, and needs directly and clearly.
So no more beating around the bush or expecting our partner to read our minds.
Exactly. It's about being upfront and honest. And this is where understanding those primary and secondary emotions comes in handy.
Right, because if we're not aware of what we're truly feeling, that primary emotion, we might end up communicating that secondary emotion, which may not be accurate or helpful.
Right. Let's say you're feeling neglected because your partner is always working late. Okay. So your primary emotion might be sadness or loneliness, but if you haven't acknowledged that primary emotion, you might lash out in anger, accusing your partner of not caring.
Which just escalates the conflict.
Exactly, and it makes it harder to actually address the issue.
Right.
But if you can take a moment to identify that underlying sadness or loneliness, you can communicate that to your partner in a way that's more likely to be heard and understood.
So instead of saying, you never spend time with me, you obviously don't care, you could say, I've been feeling really lonely lately. I miss spending time with you.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift in language, but it makes a huge difference.
Because it's coming from a place of vulnerability and authenticity. Not blame.
Exactly.
It invites your partner to connect with you rather than defend themselves.
Precisely. And when we communicate from that place of vulnerability, we create space for empathy and understanding.
This is so insightful. I'm starting to realize how often our communication is driven by those unacknowledged primary emotions. And by learning to identify and express those feelings more directly, we can change the whole dynamic.
That's the heart of what he's trying to do with this book. It's about empowering couples to break free from those destructive patterns and create a more peaceful, connected, and fulfilling relationship.
And it's not just about romantic relationships, is it?
No,
These insights can apply to any relationship where conflict comes up.
you're right. Whether it's family, friends, colleagues, these tools can help us to navigate those challenging interactions with more grace and understanding.
It's like we've been given a whole new toolkit for building stronger, more fulfilling relationships
Yes.
in all areas of our lives. But with all this talk about tools and techniques, I think it's important to remember that change takes time.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll explore further after a quick break.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. I feel like we've been handed this amazing toolkit for building stronger relationships.
It is pretty incredible.
Even when there's conflict. But, if you're anything like me, you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds great in theory,
Right.
but where do I even begin?
Yeah. It's a very common feeling. We get all this information, we get excited, and then it's like, wait, how do I actually put this into practice?
Yeah.
Luckily, Dr. Fruzzetti doesn't shy away from that.
Oh, good.
He acknowledges that. He's very clear that it's a process. It's not an overnight transformation.
Okay.
But one of the most powerful first steps is simply cultivating that mindfulness
Yeah.
that we've been talking about. Becoming more aware of your own emotional landscape, noticing your partner's emotional state,
Yeah.
and really starting to recognize those patterns that keep us stuck.
So almost like hitting the pause button on autopilot
Yes.
and becoming an observer.
Yes. We need to become aware of those knee-jerk reactions and judgments
Right.
that often just fuel the conflict. Remember that bathroom break strategy? It's not just about physically removing yourself from the situation. It's about using that time to create space for mindfulness.
It's like taking a moment to breathe, check in with yourself,
Exactly.
and kind of consciously shift your perspective
Yes.
before things escalate.
And once you start to develop that sense of awareness, you can begin to experiment with those communication and validation techniques. Remember, it's not about perfection.
Right.
It's about progress.
So we don't have to get it right every time. We can stumble.
Exactly.
We can try again, knowing that we're both learning and growing.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a destination. And it's important to remember that it takes two to tango. Both partners need to be committed to this process.
So it's a shared responsibility.
Absolutely.
It's not about one person fixing the other. It's about working together as a team.
Yes, exactly. And that shared effort, even when it's messy and imperfect, can lead to some really transformative moments.
It does.
Just think about that story of Paul and Veronica and how that validation rule of 3 completely shifted the dynamic. Who knew that consistently validating your partner, even when they're being critical, could have such an impact?
It really highlights the power of compassion and understanding, even when you're disagreeing. It's a reminder that we all have vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And when we approach each other with that kindness and empathy, it creates space for real connection.
And it reminds us that even within those heated moments, there's always hope. There's always hope for deeper intimacy and understanding. It's not about eliminating conflict altogether, because let's be honest, that's not realistic.
Yeah.
It's about learning to navigate those bumps in the road with a little more grace.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like I have a completely new perspective on conflict and how to approach it in a way that strengthens the relationship.
I'm so glad to hear that.
And remember, these insights aren't just limited to romantic relationships.
That's right.
They can be applied to any relationship. Families, friends, colleagues.
Any relationship where conflict arises.
Absolutely. And what I'm taking away from this is that even though conflict is inevitable, it doesn't have to be destructive.
Right.
In fact, it can be an opportunity for growth,
Yeah.
deeper intimacy, more understanding.
I love that. It all starts with that willingness to show up, be present, listen with an open heart, and choose connection whenever possible.
Dr. Fruzzetti has given us a roadmap, and I feel inspired to take those first steps. Thanks for joining us, everyone, on this deep dive. And remember those small, mindful choices. They can have a profound impact on your relationships
Yes, they can.
and your life.